Good evening from New York. House Majority Leader Eric Cantor rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange this morning, just hours after his boss in the House of Representatives terrified those at Cantor's side and all of Wall Street with the threat that House Republicans will only raise the debt ceiling if and only if Democrats agree to at least $2 trillion in spending cuts in the 2012 budget negotiations. What Wall Street wanted to hear was, in the end, Boehner would do the responsible thing and make sure the debt ceiling was raised, even if Republican conditions were not met. Since the Speaker failed to make that clear, one attendee at Boehner's speech called Boehner, quote, disconnected from reality, according to The Hill. The second round of budget negotiations took place at the Blair House today under the leadership of Vice President Joe Biden. Here is how the vice president characterized those discussions.
Everybody is being straight, cordial. All the facts are being laid on the table, and we're going through what we agree on, what we disagree on, and then we're going to go back after that is all over and figure out the big chunks left, whether we can make any compromises.
What do you agree on?
We agree on a lot, and I'll tell you when it's over, okay?
One powerful deficit reduction measure the parties do not agree on is tax increases. Speaker John Boehner reiterated the Republican position to NBC's Matt Lauer this morning.
What some are suggesting is that we take this money from people who would invest in our economy and create jobs, and we give it to the government. Now, the fact is, you can't tax the very people that we expect to invest in our economy and create jobs.
So as you sit here today, raising taxes, that's a non-starter.
It is off the table.
Off the table.
Everything else is on the table.
One measure Senate Democrats put on the table today was legislation ending several tax subsidies for the top 5 oil companies. Subsidy Speaker Boehner once showed a willingness to repeal. The legislation would save the U.S. government $21 billion over the next decade. Unlike the president's proposal to use those savings to fund clean energy programs, Senate Democrats propose putting those savings toward reducing the federal deficit.
There is more hot air around this building about deficit reduction than any other topic right now. And if we cannot end subsidies to the 5 biggest, most profitable corporations in the history of the planet that come from the federal taxpayer, then I don't think anyone should take us seriously about deficit reduction.
Joining me now, ranking Democrat on the House Budget Committee, Maryland Congressman Chris Van Hollen. Thanks for joining us tonight, Congressman.
Good to be with you, Lawrence.
You were in the room with the Vice President and the other budget negotiators today. Here's your chance. Tell us everything that happened in there today.
Well, as the Vice President said, it was a positive meeting. We've been looking for the areas of common ground, but it's, of course, going to get a lot more difficult when we begin engaging on the more controversial issues. And you put your finger on the issue in the lead in here, which is that you can't be serious about deficit reduction and at the same time say you refuse to get rid of subsidies for the big oil companies. That just doesn't compute. And that's what we heard from the Speaker the other day in New York with a very serious face saying, yes, I want to reduce the deficit. And on the other hand, saying, well, let's just keep shoveling taxpayer dollars out the door for the big oil companies. So, you know, we're hopeful that we will be able to converge by the end of this story because it is absolutely essential that we reduce the deficits in the country. But let's be real, that also involves dealing with the revenue side of the equation, not just the spending side.
Congressman, these kinds of talks are normally referred to as budget summit meetings. We've seen these kinds of things in the past where a full team of Democrats led by the Vice President, say, from the White House, but also Senate Finance Committee Chairman, Senate Majority Leader, in this case, House members like yourself, on the Democratic side, leaders on the budget talks go in there against or across the table from the same number of Republicans. But you just have one Republican in there, Eric Cantor, negotiating for all of the Republican players in this game. How does that work dynamically in the room where it's one against all of you?
Well, the Republicans decided to send one member from each chamber. So Eric Cantor from the House side, John Kyle from the Senate side. And essentially what they've done is they've said that these are the two guys that are going to sort of present the Republican perspective. So, look, at this point in time, we've been going through a list of areas to try and find those areas where there's agreement. And as I said, very quickly, you're going to get into the more turbulent areas. And the question will be not whether we can come together on the things where there's overlap, but whether we can, have a give and take on those issues where there's not. And that's why it's important that the Republicans take another look at this position they've taken on things like the oil subsidies, because John Boehner had it right a couple weeks ago when he said, look, when we've got big deficits, we of course need to look at the big oil subsidies, and he quickly retreated from that position. Hopefully, as these conversations go on, the John Boehner from a few weeks ago will reemerge.
Congressman, John Boehner and Republicans generally have absolutely taken tax increases off the table. Absolutely no tax increases will be considered. Is there something that the Democrats have taken off the table with comparable emphasis? Is there one thing that the Democrats absolutely will not consider?
Well, we've made it absolutely clear that the Republican budget in the House, the Ryan budget, the Republican budget, is a total non-starter, and that reflected their priorities, where they essentially said they wanted to end the Medicare guarantee, throw seniors over to the private insurance industry with rising costs, which they wanted the seniors to eat, at the same time that they wanted to actually cut taxes for millionaires. And so, yeah, that's a non-starter, and we made that absolutely clear. And we've also made it clear that any serious approach to deficit reduction involves a balance, and that you can't do it just on one side of the ledger alone.
What are the prospects for coming to an agreement?
Well, only time will tell. And what I want to make clear is that the Democrats say that in order to achieve our goal of, number one, making sure that the economy continues to grow rather than strangling the nascent recovery, but also to achieve deficit reductions over the long run, which you need for long-term economic growth, you need to have this serious approach. And you've had some bipartisan commissions out there that have said, look, you've got to look at both sides of the equation. I don't agree with every provision that they've proposed, but at least they said you got to take both parts of this. The Republicans have taken a position totally lopsided. It's our way or the highway. Their blueprint was laid out by the Republicans in the House with respect to ending the Medicare guarantee. So at the end of this movie, both sides are going to have to come together with a balanced approach. And if the Republicans refuse to do that, I think it will be an indication that they're not really serious about deficit reduction. Yes, they might want to strangle government, but it will be an indication that that's their priority rather than, in fact, dealing with the deficit.
Congressman Chris Van Hollen, I can't see the road to the agreement yet, but I hope you can. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Good to be with you.